Imagine a world where you didn't lock your front door, where $5 could carry you through the whole weekend, and where the loudest thing on the block was kids laughing as the streetlights flickered on. That was 1950s America. Back then, $5 wasn't just a bill in your wallet. It was a full weekend. Gas was 29 cents a gallon, which meant your tank was full, and you still had change left over for a Coke and a pack of gum, and you didn't pump it yourself. A young man in a crisp shirt filled the tank, wiped your windshield, and called, "You, sir," like it meant something. The houses weren't sprawling mansions or glass towers. They were modest, sturdy, and warm. A little yard out front, real wood floors inside, and neighbors who waved every time they saw you. Doors weren't locked, not because crime didn't exist, but because trust still did. If someone knocked, you let them in. If they didn't knock, it was probably your cousin bringing back the ladder he borrowed last week. America felt big, but not too big. Towns were smaller, streets quieter, and most of the faces at the grocery store were familiar. Life moved slower, steadier, and somehow simpler. Families gathered on Sundays, not because they had to, but because it was expected. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, and a lime jello mold no one liked, but everyone took a spoonful of anyway. It wasn't about the food. It was about time. The 1950s were a decade of invention and imagination, of soda fountains and station wagons, of black and white TVs and jukeboxes glowing in diners. A time when kids played outside until the streetlights came on, when a dollar stretched further, and when the future felt endless. This is the story of 100 forgotten things from 1950s America. Home didn't mean square footage. It meant warmth. In the 1950s, the average American house had one bathroom, one TV, and wood floors you swept every Saturday morning. Kitchens were pastel, mint green, baby blue, or pink, and somehow everything looked cheerful even when it was crowded. Families weren't chasing bigger homes. They were busy filling the ones they had with noise, laughter, and the smell of dinner on the stove. Neighbors weren't strangers across the fence. They were family you didn't share blood with. People swapped spare keys without a second thought. Heading out of town, handed to the Johnsons next door so they could feed the cat. Borrowed a ladder. You brought it back with a pie. Trust wasn't a word people talked about. It was something everyone lived. Sundays weren't for rushing. They were for gathering. Grandparents, cousins, the noisy uncle who told the same story every week, everyone squeezed around the table. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, and that wobbly lime jello mold nobody loved, but everybody politely scooped anyway. It wasn't the food that mattered. It was the time together. School looked different too. Desks still had inkwells, fossils from another era. And if you were bored in math, you'd poke your pencil through the hole and imagine what it was like to write with a feather. Lunch ladies weren't serving pizza pockets. They dropped meatloaf and peas on your tray with a strength that made you think twice about complaining. And by the time you reached high school, shop class taught you how to weld, fix an engine, or build a table. You didn't just graduate with a diploma. You graduated knowing how to fix things. For kids, the outdoors was the only playground that mattered. No phones, no tablets, no Wi-Fi. Just stickball in the street, bikes with streamers on the handlebars, and scraped knees that stung with iodine. The rule was simple. Be home when the streetlights came on, and somehow nobody ever got bored. Summer afternoons were for ice cream trucks that sent kids sprinting barefoot down the block with nickels in hand. Penny candy lined the shelves of corner stores, each piece in glass jars that made your choice feel like treasure. And when you wanted a treat, you didn't scroll through apps. You walked to the soda fountain, slid onto a red stool, and ordered a cherry Coke or a grilled cheese from someone who already knew your name. And of course, the barbershop was more than a place for a haircut. It was the neighborhood's living room. Stories were swapped, secrets whispered, and advice given under the buzz of clippers. Yelp didn't tell you where to go. Lou the barber did, and he'd been cutting hair since Eisenhower got elected, still charging $2. Life in the 1950s wasn't about chasing more. It was about making the most of what you had, and knowing the people around you were part of the story. Freedom in the 1950s didn't come from a screen. It came from the open road. Gas was 29 cents a gallon, and $5 filled your tank with change left over for a Coke. But you didn't pump it yourself. A young man in a pressed uniform did it for you, wiped down your windshield, and maybe even checked your oil. He called you sir or ma'am and sent you off with a smile. And what you drove said everything. The Chevrolet Bel Air hit. The streets with chrome trim, two-tone paint, and a V8 engine that looked fast even sitting still. The Ford F-100 was all steel and grit, built tough enough for 3 men and a dog to fit across the bench seat. And if your family had a station wagon, that was luxury. No seatbelts, kids piled in the back, windows down, dog drooling in the wind. It wasn't fancy, but it was freedom. Road trips were an adventure before the interstate system came along. In '56, highways were patchwork, dotted with diners, motels, and long stretches of nothing. You packed sandwiches, paper maps, and maybe an extra tire, just in case. If the car broke down, you didn't call roadside assistance. You hoped another driver stopped, or you fixed it yourself right there on the shoulder. Nights weren't just for television. They were for drive-in theaters. You pulled up, hooked a tinny speaker onto your car window, and watched a double feature under the stars. Popcorn from the snack bar might be burnt, the sound might crackle, but sitting there with your arm around someone special made it perfect. Flying back then wasn't routine. It was an event. Men wore suits, women wore gloves, and every passenger was treated like a guest. You got legroom, real meals, and a smile from the stewardess. No one rushed through security, no one showed up in sweatpants, and the idea of eating peanuts out of a bag at 30,000 feet would have sounded absurd. Phones were simpler but far less private. A rotary dial hung on the wall, and if you misdialed the last number, you had to start over from scratch. Party lines meant neighbors could pick up and listen in, whether you liked it or not. Direct dialing arrived in 1951, and suddenly, coast to coast, calls felt closer than ever before. Television was the crown jewel of the living room. Big, heavy cabinets with glowing screens the size of dinner plates. Black and white was standard, and when someone in the neighborhood got a color set, the whole block came over to watch. Families climbed onto rooftops with a wrench, turning antennas inch by inch until the static cleared. Get it right, and I Love Lucy came through crystal clear. Get it wrong, and all you saw was snow. Cars, phones, TVs, planes. The technology of the 1950s wasn't sleek or smart, but it was strong, memorable, and built to last. And most of all, it brought people together. Back then, making a living didn't mean chasing more. It meant making enough, and that was plenty. The average American salary in 1950 was about $3,200 a year, and that went further than you'd believe today. It could buy a modest house, raise a family, and even cover a summer vacation, even if it was just a week at Grandma's place. Every morning, men in pressed suits and felt hats carried briefcases onto trains or into downtown offices. They weren't chasing titles or corner offices. They were chasing stability. And at home, women ran households like finely tuned machines, armed with gleaming chrome appliances that looked more like space rockets than toasters. A shiny blender or waffle iron wasn't just a tool. It was proof of progress. But pride didn't come from what you bought. It came from what you fixed. Every man had a toolbox heavy with steel, scarred from years of grease and grit. Radios got new tubes, shoes new soles, and when a toaster gave out, Dad took it apart on the kitchen table until it hummed again. Nothing was thrown away until it was truly gone, and who needed a gym? Chores were the workout, mowing the lawn with a push mower, chopping wood for the stove, hanging laundry on a backyard line, hauling water, shoveling snow, scrubbing floors. That was exercise, and somehow your grandfather's calves were stronger than most people's today. If you wanted something new, you didn't swipe a card. You put it on layaway, a couch, a bicycle, maybe a new refrigerator. You made small payments, week by week, until it was yours. No credit scores, no instant approvals, just patience. And when you finally brought it home, you appreciated it more. Salesmen were part of everyday life. They showed up at the door in crisp suits with a smile, carrying vacuums, brushes, or encyclopedias. They gave live demonstrations in the living room, and even if Mom didn't buy a thing, she always offered them a cup of coffee. It was simply the polite thing to do. Money itself moved differently. Banks closed at 3 p.m. sharp on Friday, and if you missed it, you were broke until Monday morning. No ATMs, no apps, no 24-hour windows, just a teller behind thick glass, a leather-bound passbook, and the heavy clunk of a stamp punching your deposit into history. In the 1950s, work was steady, money was modest, and chores were endless. But people didn't measure wealth by what they owned. They measured it by what they could build, repair, and pass down. If the 1950s had a flavor, it was simple, sweet, and homemade. Mornings often began with the sound of glass clinking on the porch. The milkman had come and gone, leaving bottles lined up with little paper caps you peeled back before breakfast. Cold, fresh, and local, no labels bragging about being organic. It just was. Thirsty in the afternoon? Coca-Cola came in glass bottles that cost a nickel. The vending machine hissed as you slid the bottle free, and the first sip practically burned with fizz. No plastic, no zero sugar, just the real deal. If you were hungry late at night, there was a new place that quickly became a legend. The first Waffle House opened in 1955 in Georgia. It was tiny, cheap, and open 24 hours a day. Truckers, teenagers, and early risers all sat at the same counter, sharing waffles, coffee, and conversation. And then there was McDonald's, back when the menu had only 9 items. A hamburger was 15 cents, fries were a dime, and people ate standing by their cars, balancing burgers on the hood. No apps, no delivery drivers, no substitutions, just hot food, fast and perfect. Inside the pantry, canned food was king. Spam, condensed soups, and fruit cocktail with one lonely cherry floating on top. Housewives stocked shelves like mini fallout shelters, feeding families of 5 on one paycheck. It wasn't gourmet, but it stretched far, and casseroles kept the table full. On weekends, families pulled out the ice cream maker, rock salt, heavy cranks, and sore arms until the mixture finally set. When it did, nothing from a store could compare. Cold, creamy, and earned the hard way, one scoop at a time. And in 1953, a revolution in convenience arrived. The TV dinner. Packaged in foil trays, it cost 98 cents and promised a full meal with 0 dishes. Families loved it. It wasn't processed food. It was exciting, futuristic, and gave moms a night off from cooking. Food in the 1950s wasn't fancy. It was practical, affordable, and shared. And that made every bite taste a little better. The 1950s weren't quiet. They were alive with music, movies, and moments that shook the country from living rooms to jukeboxes. Toys even made history. In 1952, Mr. Potato Head hit the market as the first toy ever advertised on television. But back then, kids used real potatoes. Plastic spuds came later. Imagine handing a child today a raw potato and saying, "Here, play with this." And then there was Marilyn Monroe. To some, she was just a blonde bombshell. But behind the camera, she was sharp, ambitious, and fearless. In 1955, she founded her own production company, something almost unheard of for women in Hollywood. She wasn't just a star, she was a powerhouse. Music didn't just change, it exploded. Rock and roll crashed onto the scene with Elvis shaking, his hips, Chuck Berry bending strings, and little Richard pounding the piano like it was on fire. Parents panicked, preachers warned, teenagers turned the dial louder. For the first time, music felt dangerous, and that made it irresistible. Television added to the noise with American Bandstand, hosted by a clean-cut Dick Clark. Teens danced in saddle shoes and poodle skirts, while parents frowned in the kitchen. But it didn't matter. Bandstand was cool, and cool was contagious. If you wanted a night out, you didn't scroll for reviews. You went to the drive-in, cars lined up under the stars, tinny speakers hooked onto windows, popcorn from the snack bar in your lap. And if you were lucky, the jukebox at the diner afterward played your song for a dime. In 1955, the gates of Disneyland swung open. 18 rides, asphalt melting in the heat, and Walt Disney himself walking the grounds. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't matter. For kids, it was pure magic. Books got their moment too. In 1957, Dr. Seuss released The Cat in the Hat. Just 236 words, but enough to turn story time into something fun, wild, and unforgettable. Kids didn't just learn to read, they learned to laugh while doing it, and while big events filled headlines, families captured the small ones. Kodak's Brownie camera made snapshots affordable for everyone. Birthdays, beach trips, backyard barbecues, all frozen in black and white. A little grainy, sometimes with someone's finger blocking the frame. But those imperfect pictures became priceless memories. The 1950s didn't just entertain, they set the stage for a new America, louder, brighter, and ready for change. The 1950s weren't just about jukeboxes and soda fountains. They were a decade of breakthroughs, fears, and firsts that changed the world forever. The decade began with war. From 1950 to 1953, the Korean War raged. More than 1.7 million Americans served in a fight that was brutal, cold, and uphill. It never got the same attention as World War II, but for the families waiting back home, and for the soldiers who returned, it left scars that lasted a lifetime. At home, a different kind of fear gripped parents. Polio. Pools were closed, playgrounds emptied, and children were warned to stay away from crowds. Then in 1955, Jonas Salk's vaccine arrived. One shot, and it felt like the whole country exhaled at once. For the first time in years, kids could splash in public pools again without fear. Science made headlines too. In 1953, doctors pulled off what once seemed impossible: open heart surgery using a heart-lung machine. Stopping the heart, fixing it, and starting it again sounded like science fiction, but it worked. It rewrote what doctors believed was possible. That same year, two scientists named Watson and Crick unraveled the structure of DNA, the double helix. Most people didn't fully understand it then, but it was the foundation for discoveries that would shape medicine, crime-solving, and technology for decades to come. The future seemed to hum with power. In 1951, the world's first nuclear power plant flicked on in Idaho. It only lit 4 light bulbs, but it felt like the spark of a new era, one filled with both excitement and unease. Atomic energy was the promise of progress and the shadow of fear all at once. And in 1957, the world looked up in shock. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik, a shiny sphere the size of a beach ball, into orbit. Suddenly, space wasn't just a dream, it was a race. Schools pushed science harder, and kids across America started looking at the stars a little differently. The seeds of the digital age were planted in the 50s too. In 1952, the first barcode was patented, a simple bullseye design that looked like something from a comic book. In 1958, the microchip was invented, a tiny piece of silicon destined to change everything from telephones to the way we live today. The 1950s were a decade caught between tradition and transformation. For every backyard barbecue, there was a lab a launch pad, or a battlefield rewriting history. In the 1950s, traditions weren't hobbies. They were the rhythm of life, woven into every week, every holiday, every season. Sunday wasn't optional, it was the anchor of the week. Families dressed in their best clothes, men in suits, women in gloves, kids tugging at stiff collars, and filled the pews. Afterward, everyone shook hands, swapped news, and headed home for roast chicken. Church wasn't just religion, it was routine, and it held communities together. Meals carried their own traditions too. Jell-O salads appeared at nearly every gathering, wobbling with fruit suspended in mid-air. Or worse, shredded carrots, sometimes even cottage cheese. Nobody really liked them, but everyone took a scoop anyway, because that's just what you did. When a baby was born, neighbors didn't send a gift card. They showed up with casseroles, hand-me-down cribs, and whatever else a new family needed. The new dad handed out cigars, the new mum stayed home to rest, and the whole block felt like it was part of the celebration. Holidays were pure magic for kids. On Halloween, costumes weren't bought in stores. They were made from old sheets, cardboard, or whatever could be found in the closet. A pillowcase doubled as a candy bag, and kids roamed the streets without parents in sight. Just laughter, candy, and a night that felt like freedom. Everyday fun was simple too. Roller skates had metal wheels that rattled like thunder on sidewalks. You tightened them with a skate key that hung around your neck, and if they broke mid-ride, you walked home barefoot with bloodied socks and a smile. Yard games filled afternoons, marbles, horseshoes, jump rope, and lawn darts. The real ones, sharp enough to skewer a foot if you weren't careful. Nobody needed instructions. The rules were made up as you went. Even small trips carried tradition. Every vacation, even just 2 towns over, meant grabbing a postcard. Thinking of you, scrawled on the back, a few cents to mail, and a keepsake. That many families tucked away in drawers for decades, and mornings began with simple rituals. Gospel, or news on the radio, bacon frying in the pan, Dad reading the newspaper while Mom made coffee. No scrolling, no playlists, just voices on the air and the steady comfort of routine. The 1950s weren't just about events or inventions, they were about the traditions that shaped daily life. Small, steady, and unforgettable. In the 1950s, safety didn't come from gadgets or warnings, it came from grit, trust, and a little bit of luck. Polio was the fear that haunted parents. Pools closed, playgrounds emptied, and families prayed their children wouldn't get sick. Then, in 1955, Jonas Salk's vaccine arrived, and the whole country seemed to breathe again. For the first time in years, kids could cannonball into the deep end without worry. If you got sick, you didn't scroll the internet. You called the family doctor and he came to your house. A black bag, a thermometer, and a calm look that said, "You'll be fine." Just his presence made you feel better before the medicine even started working. But health wasn't coddled. Kids rode bikes without helmets, skinned their knees on sidewalks, and limped home proud of the scars. Moms dabbed iodine on cuts like it was holy water, and no one ever complained. You fell, you got up, you kept going. Cigarettes were everywhere. In living rooms, offices, even doctors' waiting rooms. Ads claimed they helped digestion or soothed the throat. Nobody thought twice. Smoke was just part of the scenery. Cooling off in the summer didn't mean air conditioning. Most homes didn't have it. You opened windows, turned on a fan, or stretched out on the porch with a glass of lemonade. On the hottest nights, families slept in the basement. Nobody called it suffering. It was just summer. Exercise wasn't a gym membership. It was chores. Mowing the lawn with a push mower, chopping wood, hanging laundry, shoveling snow. That was your workout. And somehow, your grandfather's calves put modern fitness influences to shame. Even discipline looked different. In school, teachers ruled. The classroom with stern looks, wooden rulers, and no room for backtalk. You stood when spoken to, said yes, ma'am, and prayed no note got sent home. Respect wasn't optional. It was expected. In the 1950s, health and safety weren't padded with rules and labels. They were built on toughness, trust, and habits that kept families moving forward, even when life wasn't easy. In the 1950s, staying connected didn't mean being online. It meant sharing wires, voices, and screens the size of dinner plates. Phones were heavy, corded, and mounted to the wall. To dial, you spun a rotary wheel, and if you messed up the last number, you had to start over from the beginning. Privacy didn't exist. Party lines meant multiple households shared the same connection. If a neighbor picked up, they might listen in. Everyone knew it, but no one thought it was strange. In 1951, direct dialing arrived. For the first time, you could call coast to coast without asking an operator to patch you through. Suddenly, America felt a little smaller, and voices traveled a little faster. Television was becoming the new hearth of the home. Sets were enormous wooden cabinets, with glowing black and white screens that weighed as much as a refrigerator. Rooftop antennas were a family project. Dad climbing up with a wrench, kids shouting directions from the living room, and the picture flipping from static to crystal clear if you were lucky. Color TV arrived in 1954, but it was so expensive that when one family on the block bought one, the whole neighborhood came over to watch. TV itself shut down at night. Around midnight, the national anthem played, the screen went dark, and static filled the room. No late-night shows, no endless content, just silence. That was your cue to go to bed. But television wasn't the only source of news and entertainment. Radio was still king in the mornings, carrying gospel, weather, and the latest headlines, while bacon sizzled in the pan. Newspapers landed on porches, folded neatly, ready to be read at the breakfast table. And when a major event hit, like President Truman's first coast-to-coast broadcast in 1951, it felt like the entire country was united by one voice, one screen, one moment. Communication in the 1950s was slower, heavier, and simpler. But maybe because of that, every phone call, every broadcast, and every front-page headline felt bigger. In the 1950s, getting dressed wasn't casual. It was a statement, one that spoke of pride, polish, and tradition. Men didn't leave the house without a hat. Fedoras, flat caps, and pork pies were part of the uniform. You tipped your hat when greeting someone and removed it indoors without thinking. It wasn't fashion. It was automatic. The daily look for men was sharp and steady. Suits, ties, polished shoes, and a briefcase in hand. Even blue-collar workers carried a sense of formality. Button-down shirts, clean trousers, and work boots that lasted years. Clothes weren't about trends, they were about respect. Women's style was just as deliberate. Dresses often cinched at the waist, gloves matched the handbag, and hair was set in curls with metal rollers. Salons buzzed with gossip under giant helmet dryers that looked like something out of science fiction. The smell of hairspray and perm solution lingered in the air as women traded tips and stories. Children's wardrobes were simple but neat. Boys wore collared shirts and slacks, often with their hair slicked back. Girls wore poodle skirts, saddle shoes, and ribbons in their hair. And no one stepped out the door looking sloppy, not for school, not for errands, not even for play. Flying on an airplane was a fashion show in itself. Men wore suits, women wore dresses and pearls, and children sat polished and polite. No sweatpants, no sneakers, no casual comfort. Travel wasn't just about getting somewhere, it was about looking the part while you did. Even in the bathroom, style had its place. Pastel tiles in pink, mint green, or baby blue filled homes across the country. From the tub to the toilet, color was coordinated, and bath night became a full operation with siblings lined up, oldest to youngest, in the same water. The 1950s were an era when fashion meant dignity. Every outfit, every curl, every polished shoe reflected a belief that how you presented yourself mattered, not just to you, but to everyone around you. In the 1950s, fun didn't come from a screen in your hand. It came from the street outside, the local diner, or a warm summer night under the stars. Drive-in theaters were the ultimate weekend escape. You pulled up in the family car, hooked a speaker onto the window, and settled in for a double feature beneath the open sky. Popcorn from the snack bar was hit or miss, sometimes burnt, but if you were lucky, your date held your hand, and the movie didn't even matter. On hot afternoons, kids sprinted barefoot at the sound of the ice cream truck. Quarters clutched tight. They shouted for bomb pops, drumsticks, or fudgesicles. No one cared about sugar or calories. It was about the thrill of chasing the truck, getting sticky fingers, and spending the rest of the day grinning with a melted mustache. Every town had a soda fountain or lunch counter. You spun on red stools, ordered a cherry Coke or a grilled cheese, and the waitress knew your name before you said a word. Teenagers crowded in after school, dropping dimes in the jukebox, waiting for Buddy Holly or Chuck Berry to crackle through. The speakers. Leisure for kids didn't need gadgets. Games filled yards and sidewalks, marbles, jump rope, hopscotch, horseshoes, even lawn darts sharp enough to make every throw a gamble. Rules were invented on the spot. Arguments settled with a coin toss, and play lasted until the streetlights flickered on. Even simple toys carried magic. A red radio flyer wagon could haul groceries, siblings, or the family dog. And when it rained, it transformed into a pirate ship, a turtle shell, or a makeshift fort. Imagination was the only upgrade required. Fun in the 1950s was simple, unpolished, and shared. Whether it was a Coke at the counter, a film at the drive-in, or a barefoot race to the ice cream truck, joy was always close by, and it never needed batteries. In the 1950s, home wasn't just a place you lived. It was the heartbeat of everyday life. Simple, steady, and full of routine that tied families together. Most houses were modest. One car in the driveway, one bathroom for everyone, and a kitchen, often painted in cheerful pastels, pink, mint green, or baby blue. Wood floors creaked under small feet, and the smell of dinner drifted through screen doors that never stayed locked. Family dinners weren't optional. Every Sunday, the whole clan gathered. Parents, grandparents, cousins, and that one uncle who told the same story every week. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, and a lime jello mold no one liked, but everyone scooped anyway. It wasn't about the food. It was about the time spent together. Milk wasn't picked up at the store. It was delivered to your doorstep in glass bottles by the milkmen, often before sunrise. The clink of bottles on the porch meant the day was starting, and kids raced to peel off the little paper lid before breakfast. Chores filled daily life, but they were part of the rhythm. Hanging laundry on the line, mowing the lawn with a push mower, or sweeping porches by hand. Work and family blended together, and somehow it felt less like drudgery and more like teamwork. When babies were born, the neighborhood pitched in. Casseroles appeared at the door, a crib might be passed down, and the new father handed out cigars to mark the occasion. Everyone shared in the joy, because raising a child wasn't just a family job, it was a community one. Even bath night became a family affair. With one bathroom, kids took turns in the same tub, oldest first, youngest last. Towels were thin, water cooled quickly, but no one complained. It was simply how things were done. The 1950s home wasn't about luxury or abundance. It was about togetherness, trust, and routines that made even the simplest house feel like the center of the world. In the 1950s, childhood wasn't lived through screens or apps. It was built on scraped knees, chalk-stained hands, and the steady rhythm of school bells. Classrooms were simple. Wooden desks still had little round inkwells, even though most kids were already using ballpoint pens. Teachers stood at the front, with firm voices and stricter rules. Yes, ma'am, and no, sir weren't suggestions. They were survival skills. School lunches weren't pizza slices or chocolate milk cartons. They were hearty and plain: meatloaf, peas, mashed potatoes, and a small carton of milk. Complaints didn't get you anywhere. The lunch lady looked like she could bench press sacks of flour and wasn't about to argue with a 10-year-old. Shop class was part of growing up. Students learned welding, woodworking, and engine repair. You didn't just graduate with a diploma. You left school knowing how to fix a lawnmower, build a table, or patch a roof. Practical skills weren't electives. They were essentials. Outside of school, kids hustled early. Paper boys slung heavy canvas bags over their shoulders and rode bikes through dawn streets, tossing newspapers with impressive accuracy. If you wanted spending money, you didn't stream videos or sell candy bars. You delivered, you mowed, you babysat, you worked. Childhood play was just as rugged. Sidewalk chalk came from crushed rocks. Hopscotch grids filled driveways, and marbles clinked across sidewalks until sunset. Roller skates had metal wheels that thundered on pavement, tightened with a skate key that hung on a string around your neck. If they broke, you walked home barefoot, socks torn and grinning. Even learning at home felt different. Encyclopedias lined living room shelves, bought in sets from door-to-door salesmen. They were the family's internet, heavy, expensive, and the first stop for every school report. In the 1950s, school and childhood were about discipline, discovery, and doing. It wasn't always easy, but it built a generation that knew how to work, how to play, and how to grow up tough. In the 1950s, a dollar didn't just sit in your pocket. It stretched, it mattered, and it could buy far more than we imagine today. The average salary was about $200 a year. Modest by modern standards, but enough to buy a house, raise a family, and even take a vacation. One income often supported the whole household, and it worked because prices matched the rhythm of ordinary life. Gas cost just 29 cents a gallon. $5 filled your tank, left change for a Coke, and maybe even a pack of gum. And when you pulled into the station, you didn't pump it yourself. An attendant rushed over, cleaned your windshield, and tipped his cap like you were the most important customer in the world. Entertainment was just as affordable. A movie ticket in 1950 cost 48 cents. For under $1, you got a seat, a cartoon short before the feature, and a bucket of popcorn. Families went to the theater not just for films, but for an entire night out that didn't break the bank. Cars were within reach too. A brand new Ford F-100 pickup in the early 50s could be yours for under $1,300. No touchscreens, no Bluetooth, just steel, chrome, an AM radio, and a bench seat wide enough for the whole family. And the dog. Even McDonald's, just starting its rise, served hamburgers for 15 cents and fries for a dime. You walked up to the counter, paid in coins, and ate your meal on the hood of your car. Fast, cheap, and filling, without ever needing a menu bigger than a postcard. Big purchases worked differently too. If you couldn't afford furniture or a new appliance up front, you used layaway. Month by month, you chipped away at the price until you brought it home. No credit cards, no endless interest, just patience and pride when the final payment was made. In the 1950s, the economy wasn't about having more. It was about making enough, living within your means, and stretching every dollar until it worked. And somehow that made even small purchases feel like victories. The 1950s weren't perfect, but they carried a kind of magic, a balance of innocence, innovation, and community that feels almost impossible today. It was a time when trust was stronger than technology, when neighbors held your house keys, when milk bottles clinked on the porch at dawn, and when Sunday dinner gathered the whole family, whether you wanted to be there or not. America was changing fast. Rockets launched, microchips were born, Elvis shook his hips, and Disneyland opened its gates. Yet life still moved at a slower pace. Children played until the streetlights flicked on. Families huddled around one TV, one radio, or one phone. A paycheck stretched, a handshake meant something, and laughter often came free. Today, we live with more convenience, more choices, and more technology than ever before. But in chasing progress, we sometimes forget the small, steady joys that once held life together. Penny candy, jukebox diners, handwritten postcards, or the sound of a bike with streamers rattling down the block. The 1950s were built on little things, 100 of them, mostly forgotten now, but each one a thread in the fabric of a decade when America felt big, but not too big.